Is this all new bike the best 450cc dirt bike on the market? Welcome back to another video, everybody. My name is Anthony, and in today's video, yes, you've seen it in the title, you've seen it in the thumbnail, you see it right in front of me. We have the all new 2026 Ducati Desmo450 MX. Now, I've waited a long 7 months for this bike to be delivered, and tomorrow is the first time ever I will swing a leg over this bike. I'm not gonna waste too much of your guys' time before we get into some raw POV footage of the Desmo450, but stick around to the end of the video so you guys can hear my riding impressions, my overall impression of the bike, the purchasing experience, working on it so far, and everything in between. Now, without further ado, we're gonna head out to Kahia Creek MX for the first ever ride on this bike.
Wow, really just taking it easy, trying to feel the bike out, break it in, see how the track's developing. Right off the bat is the minimal engine braking, very minimal engine braking actually. Especially for a 450, it does not feel heavy at all, and I'm going really slow right now for what my capability is. Just so you guys know, I've been in second gear pretty much the entire time I've been riding, and second gear is extremely long. There's almost tracks I want to use first the corners because it's so lonely out here. So here we go.
After a successful day out at the track, we are now back at the house, gave the bike a nice wash, good air filter service, checked all the nuts and bolts, even checked the spokes as well, and I'm glad to report to you guys that nothing went wrong on this bike after its first official ride. Now, the reason why you guys clicked on this video is you guys want to know how I like this bike. I've been getting that question a lot from friends, family, fellow riders, and it was actually really cool seeing other people's reactions to this bike the first time seeing it out in the wild. I got numerous people waving me down on the way to the track, wanting me to roll down my window, pointing at me, pointing at the bike. So it was, again, really cool to see other people's reactions to this all-new Desmo450. Let's kick it off from the top. Let's start with the aesthetics. This bike is an amazing looking motorcycle, and if you guys thought this bike was beautiful in photos and or videos, I'd be hard-pressed to find someone who thinks otherwise seeing it in person. The deep red plastic has a very bold and striking look to it. All of the body lines tie in together very nicely. All of the finishes on the cylinder head, the ignition cover, the clutch cover, even some of the bolts that they use on the engine cases, I'm super fan of. They're high quality, they look really nice, and overall, aesthetically, this bike looks amazing. Now, Ducati is known for two things, one of which being the Desmo valve train system. I'm not going to get too much into that as I want this to be more riding impression focused rather than technology focused. And the other thing they're known for is, again, quality. And that does translate to this all-new Desmo450. Out on track, this power plant is actually one of my favorites of the 450cc paddock. It has very little to no engine vibration, very little to no engine braking, so coming into the corners, it is not loading up the front end, which I do really enjoy from this motorcycle. The power is very user-friendly, so if you're a rider who likes to be hard on the throttle but not have too much hit or an abrupt power curve, this bike is going to suit those types of riders, and each gear is very usable, especially second gear and third gear are also usable in a lot of situations out on track. I think for tighter corners, second gear is definitely the way to go, or even corners that have a lot of heavy dirt, that being sand, prepped dirt, or even some mulch, second gear is your friend. But I do think if you hold each gear a little bit longer than you're used to, you will get rewarded from the Desmo450, as this bike does rev out to 11,900 RPM. I think that's roughly about 400 to 500 more RPM than some of the other 450cc motocross bikes. If I'm wrong on that, you guys can correct me down below in the comment section. So again, the power is very user-friendly. I actually do wish the bike had an extra 5, maybe 10% increase on power. And I do think that can be accomplished with a few simple mods like an exhaust, maybe a vented airbox cover, a Vortex ECU, some mapping. So there are some options there to play with. The majority of the day was spent in map 2, the red map, which is the more aggressive map. I did start the day out in the green map, which is map 1, a little bit softer throttle response, a little bit softer power. I didn't enjoy that as much as map 2, so I opted for map 2. Went ahead, liked that extra power, a little bit more aggressive hits. But again, I am left wanting an extra 5 to 10% more power and lower RPM to middle RPM situations. Moving on to the suspension. This Showa suspension is actually very similar to what's on the Kawasaki KX450, the Honda CRF450R, the RMZ450. The main difference being the internal settings of both the front forks and the rear shock. And actually looking at the rear shock, it is very similar to the shock on the KX450. I've actually gone on record in saying it's the same shock. It's not quite the same. The shock body has a slight alteration for a bleed hole. The shock clevis on the Desmo450 is actually a little bit different when compared to the KX450. Talking about the valving settings, I do think it is on the soft side, especially the front forks. Hard on braking, this bike will dive a little bit, landing from jumps, or even blowing through a set of chatter bumps. This bike will blow through the stroke. So I did find that quite surprising for me, as I thought this bike, again, was oversprung for my weight. As I'm 155 pounds, this bike is normally suited for about 170, 185 pound rider. But to find myself blowing through the stroke, I was quickly reaching for the flathead. I did an additional 4 clicks stiffer on compression for the front forks. I did 4 clicks stiffer low speed compression on the shock, and about a half a turn high speed on the shock as well. And that did improve the holdup and bottoming resistance of this bike. I did bottom the forks out 3 different times out on track on both the main track and the vet track. So again, I am wanting a little bit more holdup, progressivity from the front forks, as well as bottoming resistance as well. Overall, I do think the suspension package on this bike is good. It doesn't necessarily shine or is great in any specific area. It's overall just a good starting platform to work with, especially in terms of hardware as well. So I'm really excited to revalve this bike at my day job at Ride JBI and report back to you guys on how this bike feels after a revalve. Let's move on to more of my riding impressions of the motorcycle. Sitting on the bike for the first time, the bike felt a little bit tall, a little bit long as well. That actually translated out on the track in certain track scenarios as well. Moving on to my riding impressions of the bike. Moving on to my riding impressions of the bike. First time I sat on the bike felt a little bit tall, a little bit long, but I wasn't going to get too worried about that. And yes, that did translate to my on-track riding impressions in certain track scenarios, but overall, I did have a good feeling on the motorcycle. The rider triangle, that being the bars, the seat, the foot peg ratio, felt just a touch big for me as I'm 5 feet 7 inches. I don't have a long inseam or long legs at all. So I do think your standard rider who is about 170 pounds, maybe 5'9", 5'10", could hop on this thing in stock form and feel really comfortable. A couple things on the ergonomics front that I do want to change. I do want to get some flatter bars to kind of decrease the rise a little bit. I also want to narrow the bars a little bit as well. I would like to shave down the seat a little bit, maybe 10 to 15 millimeters, get a little bit of extra butt clearance when in the rider attack position. The chassis side of things was actually really interesting. This bike is composed of, I guess, half of the elements when compared to the other chassis and the 450cc paddock. It also doesn't feature as many welds, eliminating some weaknesses from the structural integrity of the bike. Out on track, I thought it'd be a little bit more rigid. I didn't think it was necessarily rigid or harsh or anything like that. I actually had a buddy hop on this bike from his 25 YZ450F, and his first comment was, wow, the bike is, I know it's a new bike, but it is so damn stiff. It is so damn rigid. I didn't necessarily feel that out on track. It had a comfortable feel to it, but it wasn't necessarily the most comfortable. I would actually venture to say the KX450 has a little bit more chassis comfort when compared to this bike, but this bike isn't too far out of the realm when compared to the KX450. Turning this bike, I actually had a good time, but bad time at the same time, and I'll clarify that a little bit. I did think this bike is hard to tip in or lean in on corner entry. I did think it was actually quite easy to kind of blow past your line and drift past it a little bit. But once executed properly, this bike holds the line really well. It has a lot of front end traction, a lot of front end feel. Overall, I'm actually really happy with how this bike corners when executed properly. But again, I do think there is times where this bike takes a little bit of extra rider input to lean it over into a corner or even a rut. So that's something to work on with this bike, and I'm going to mess with some different fork heights, sag heights to see if I can get this bike to turn a little bit better. At high speeds, this bike is really stable. I wanted to ride this bike at Kahia Creek MX first because that track has a little bit of everything. It's got sand, it's got hard pack, rollers, big jumps, high speed straightaways, and this chassis really excelled on a track that was, to be honest, beat to shit. So again, just to wrap up the things on the chassis, very stable, very planted, predictable feeling as well. I didn't feel like the bike really stepped out on me or did anything weird. There's actually a section on the track, on the main track, where it had some snake ruts heading up a medium-sized jump, and I never once just got awkward or sketchy or kicked weird off of that. So I was really happy to report that this bike jumps pretty well, corners pretty well, and doesn't do anything out of the ordinary or super negative. Moving on to some more personal preference items, I actually enjoyed the grips. I do think the contact patch between your inner palm to the grip is a really nice soft feel. But one of the things I did not like is, even with 2 hours of riding, I did get some blisters on both of my thumbs, so that was not pleasant. I actually stopped riding because of it, because it started to bleed and not feel super good. So I do think the flange is a little bit tough on the thumbs, but overall the grips, I do like them. They're a little bit thinner, so guys with smaller hands will enjoy these grips, I think. Guys with larger hands, I don't think you guys will enjoy these grips, and I think you guys will be quickly reaching for a set of ODIs, Pro Tapers, or Rentals. Tires, I do think that is one thing that could be improved. I'm not a fan of the Pirelli MX32 Scorpions. I just think from corner to corner, track to track, it does not have as much traction and predictability levels when compared to a Dunlop MX34, a Bridgestone X31, and actually I've ordered a set of X31 Bridgestones for up front and a scoop tire out back. It is the Bridgestone X10. So I'm super excited to try those tires, which is my favorite tire on this bike. Seat cover, I think I touched on this as far as the ergonomics. It's not the grippiest seat cover in the world. I do think a ribbed seat cover or even an aftermarket seat cover with a little bit more traction would be a nice upgrade to this. Doesn't break the bank. So I do think for an extra $60, $70 for a seat cover, that's gonna be the way to go. I do think installing it might be a little tough. The jury is still out on that. One last thing I want to touch on is the brakes. Now the Brembos, I am a huge fan of these Brembos. I think they're, if not the same, very similar to the Brembos that come on the Austrian models. Great power, great modulation, and I do prefer the Brembo brakes over the Nissan brakes. So No complaints there. Up front, out back, the Brembo's got you covered. Now, I've touched on a lot in this video, that being the engine, the chassis, suspension, some of the componentry of the bike, how it looks. You guys might have some questions. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and drop them down in the comment section below. A couple quick notes before I let you guys go in this video. When I was heat cycling my bike for the first time, I did have radiator fluid pour out of the overflow hose. It happened on my first heat cycle and my third heat cycle. It was nothing to worry about as the radiator fluid was overfilled, as again, coming out of the overflow hose. Checking the radiator fluid after it had happened is actually right where it should be. So if you guys do pick up one of these Desmo 450s and you guys see radiator fluid pouring out, I don't think it's anything to worry about. Check your radiator fluid after the bike cools down and you should be A-okay. Another thing I want to touch on is the axles are not greased. Much like other dirt bikes from Yamaha, Kawasaki, Honda, the Austrians, etc. Axles are not greased. So go ahead, take this bike apart when you get it, grease the swing arm, the front axle, the rear axle, all your linkage and shock bolts as well. I did that before I rode this bike. I will say some of the nuts and bolts were greased. My triple clamp bolts were greased. Some of my shock bolts and linkage bolts were greased as well. A little bit bummed to not see that grease make its way to the axle and some of the pivots, but nonetheless, it just takes an extra 30 to 40 minutes on your part before you guys go out and ride to do so. So not a huge complaint on that front. Another quick tip, if you guys remove your front forks and then go to reinstall your front forks, the bottom clamp is a really tight fit on the fork tube. The fork tube gets a little bit thicker as you slide the forks up through the clamps, and it takes a little bit of extra effort to push the forks through the triple clamps. Two things that you can do to combat this. One, just remove your triple clamp bolts when you go to slide the forks up through the triple clamps. Another thing that you guys can do is take a flathead screwdriver, pry these triple clamps open a little bit to get in a little extra space, and then you can go ahead, slide your forks through the triple clamps. That is something I did notice as I took these forks off to go ahead and sticker and clicker them right off the bat. Again, Ducati is known for fit and finish. All the clickers were set where they should be. Tire pressure was set at 13 PSI, so I was super stoked on that. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I took some of the bolts actually before I went out for the first time. Everything was tight, and everything is actually hit with either a sticker or a paint pen. So I took some time to get all of those off, peel them off. I also took some contact cleaner, got all of those paint pen marks, or pretty much all of them off as well. So that took an extra 10-15 minutes. So what is my overall impressions? I have very little negatives so far with the bike and a lot of positives. I think this video has been very positive in praising this bike. These are my genuine and true feelings of this bike. In no way or capacity am I affiliated with Ducati. I am just a fan of the brand, fan of the bike, and I am happy to have them in the motocross space. But there are some things I do think that could be improved. For me, this bike is a home run. I'm super excited to get more seat time on this bike, take you guys along for the ride, as well as mods, and really just see what this bike is truly capable of outside of its stock form. I think this bike actually has a lot of hidden potential. So again, I do think with a few tweaks and tunes, this bike can really unlock all of its potential out on track. Now, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. I've been filming for quite a while now. I've had a lot to say about this bike, and overall, I am super happy with my purchase of this motorcycle. I purchased it from Malcolm Smith Motorsports in Riverside, California. Then transaction was quick, easy, quite painless. I will say the bike was a little bit more expensive than I was hoping for, but again, with Ducati, you do pay for the name, you do pay for the brand, and you do pay for a quality motorcycle. I don't think I overpaid for a motorcycle that is underperforming or underwhelming by any means necessary. So overall, I am super stoked on the 2026 Ducati Desmo 450. There will be a lot more content featuring this bike on my YouTube channel. So if you aren't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that would be greatly appreciated. Again, if you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I will try and do my best to answer each and every single one of them. Had a great time making this video, and I'm super excited to get more seat time on the Desmo 450. Peace.